Hi, I'm Mike Zipser with Fast Forward, and I am here at Capclave 2016 with our makeshift set and makeshift tech. And I am here with Jon Skovron. Welcome to Fast Forward.
Why, thank you very much.
So, I'm going to start with some background. You were a theater major and actually a professional actor for a while.
I was. I had my actor's equity card and everything, yeah.
And then you went into writing fiction. What drove that?
Well, okay, so I had some doubts during, it was a really intense program that I went to at Carnegie Mellon where you do literally nothing but theater all day long from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. and for 4 years. And somewhere around year 3, I started thinking, maybe this wasn't for me. But, that far into it, you just gotta see it through to the end. And by the time I graduated, I talked myself into, I could do this. And the thing was, though, that I at the end of the, when you graduate, they send you on these showcases to New York and to Los Angeles. And I did terribly in the New York showcase. No one had any interest in me. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And then we went out to LA, and I genuinely couldn't have cared less about Los Angeles at the time. And I did great. And I'm sure there's something to that. But I did great, and I got all these calls from casting directors and auditioning for pilots and the like. And I found it really not for me. The whole process of auditioning there was really, I remember there was one particular, I went onto the Paramount Studios lot, and there was it's really kind of cool. You're walking on the line, you're like, oh, I'm so cool. Here I am on the Paramount lot. I'm gonna be a famous actor. It's gonna be amazing. And then I end up sitting in this like tiny little cramped office, and like the dude on the other side is like this kind of like old Hollywood guy, and he's like, so Skovron, you're funny, right? And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah. You do some acting for me. And I'm like, okay. And so like right now in front of the, he's like, yeah, just do something for me right now. And I'm like, okay. So I did like a little monologue that I had prepared, and it was like this very sweet, touching little monologue about this young guy dealing with like his younger brother, or like the death of his younger brother, something like that. It was a really touching monologue, really heartfelt. And he's like, yeah, but you're funny, right? I mean, you're a funny guy. That's what you do. You do funny, right? And I was like, yeah, I could do funny. Yeah, sure. And so I had that experience over and over again where they wanted to just cram me into the wacky neighbor box. And I wasn't interested. And so I walked away from that, and I said, well, maybe I won't do, film and television. Maybe I'll just stick to theater. And so I did. I happened to be cast shortly after in a production of Merchant of Venice in Pittsburgh. And it was set in a warehouse rather than in a theater, an un-air-conditioned warehouse, and it was 90 degrees, and it was really hot. And I had some conflicts with the director, this Bulgarian guy named Mladen Kislov, and I was playing Lancelot Gobbo, which is the clown. And I'd played more than one Shakespearean clown.
Because you're a funny guy.
Because I'm a funny guy, right? And so I always ended up playing the Shakespearean clowns. It's just like, it kind of had become by the point like a specialty for me, I guess. And so I knew how to play a Shakespearean clown by this point. I'd done a bunch. And so he's like, you're an angry clown. This is what you are. And I was like, no, he's not angry. He's not angry. He's like, no, I make you an angry clown. You are angry because I say. And I'm like, so we got into this whole conflict. Possibly because of that conflict, he ended up costuming me in a wool sailor suit in 90 degrees in this warehouse. And I'm just sitting backstage, just like pouring sweat and just so miserable, waiting to go on. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. and I happened to be reading John Irving's World According to Garp. And with the arrogance that only a 22-year-old can muster, I was like, I can do this, right? In retrospect, absurd, but that was it. It was like this moment where I just decided I'm not going to be an actor anymore. I'm going to write books. I don't know why the idea hadn't occurred to me before then. Being a movie star had obviously occurred to me. Being a rock star before that had also occurred to me. But being an author, it was like this unimaginable thing until that moment. It suddenly clicked that this is something, because I'd been writing stories this whole time. It never occurred to me that I should do anything with them. And so after that moment, I basically shifted my entire focus only to writing. And it only took me 10 years to get published.
That's amazing. Yeah, so an overnight success.
Easy overnight success.
Yeah, and you started writing short fiction.
I did. I remember I was really excited. I was in Jim Bain had this Bain's Universe. It was like an online thing. I don't know if you.
Yep.
So I was in the same issue as Gene Wolfe. And I was like so excited about that I couldn't even stand it. And we all got to be on the same email list. And this is my first thing, right? And here I am on this email list with like Cory Doctorow and Charlie Strauss and Gene Wolfe, and I'm just like, oh God, you know. And I was like, I never said anything on the email list, of course, because I didn't want, terrified of embarrassing myself. Until years later, when I did get my first book published, I actually dug up that old mailing list and emailed. I wasn't even sure if anyone was on it anymore. And I was like, hi, I just finally got a novel published, and I was wondering if anyone had any advice for me.
Oh, that's actually pretty smart.
Shockingly, Gene Wolfe replied. And he basically told me what not to do when seeking a blurb from an author. So I knew that right off the bat, and what never to do with that.
That's good. And your first stuff, and what you've been doing until recently, was YA.
It was young adult. I actually wrote 2 non-young adult novels first that will never see the light of day. They were absolutely terrible and should never be published or spoken of. And
Too late.
Yeah, and then so I've been kind of beating my head against this for a while, and then my agent was like, and this was in like 2007. Twilight had just come out and was just starting to kind of become a thing, and she's like, why don't you try this young adult thing that everyone's talking about? And I was like, really, young adult, like Hatchet, Gary Paulson, you know, that was all I knew of, and so she gave me a list of some folks, and I picked up Holly Black's books and Gabriel Zevin's books, and I was just blown away by I remember reading one of Holly Black's Modern Tales of Fairy, and in the very first chapter, the teenage girl walks in and catches her mom having sex with her boyfriend, and I was like, you can do this? Well, all right, you know, sign me up. And yeah, so that was when I wrote my first young adult novel.
Yeah, and you kept doing it, but now you've come out with your first adult novel, which is first of a series, the Empire Storm series.
Yeah, Hope and Red.
Hope and Red, which is a really good book.
Well, thank you.
I really liked it. The world is very interesting. The Empire and the city. And Paradise, it was Paradise Circle?
Paradise Circle, the
Paradise
neighborhood.
Circle,
Yeah,
the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The characters are really good. What was the seed for this book? What was it that drove you to write it?
Well, there was a couple of things, and it's hard to kind of parse it all out because it ends up being a bit of a stew. I can pinpoint a few elements that I had been kind of exploring on my own without any thought to putting them together at first. One was I was obsessed with early New York history, history of early New York City. And I think there's you can see that very clearly in the island of New Lavin, and particularly Paradise Circle is inspired in great detail from some of the history of Lower Manhattan. And there's actually a character in Hope and Red that I just plucked from history because she's just too perfect. Sadie the goat was a real person, and in fact did briefly for a couple of months sail up and down the Hudson River trying to be a pirate. It didn't go very well.
I was thinking, I love that character.
Yeah.
And to know that there was
a
somebody
real
like
person, and she was
so cool.
Her name was Sadie the Goat because she used to headbutt people. That was like what she was known for, and she was referred to as an artist of mayhem, which is never explained what that means. So I had to kind of come up with my own meaning of what it was. But yeah, she's real, and a lot of the places are inspired. And there is a feeling of this, particularly Herbert Ashbery's The Gangs of New York, which, have you read the?
I haven't read it, no.
So there's
I've read
the
about
movie,
it.
right?
Yeah.
And the movie is interestingly only one chapter in a very big book, yeah. And there's a wealth of amazing kind of folk stories. It's really a lot of folk stories, particularly early New York. It's just word of mouth stuff that's gone around, and there's this sense of the tall tale, but it's an urban tall tale, you know, and there's a kind of a gritty, it almost feels, I actually once described this book, I was like, it's like Tom Waitsian. There's a Tom Waits kind of quality to it, and there's even a reference to Tom Waits when they're in this theater called the Rag and Boards, and they start chanting "Hoist That Rag." There's a Tom Waits song called "Hoist That Rag," which references that sort of thing.
Yeah, the characters are really interesting because Sadie the goat kind of befriends one of the title characters, Red.
Yeah, she kind of adopts him, really.
Yeah, yeah.
She's a local, like a matriarch of crime, a local kind of celebrity that way.
And he's very interesting because he's very young at the beginning of the book, and he, like Hope, are both orphans by fairly unpleasant means.
Yeah.
And Red is kind of adopted by Sadie and decides, since he needs to figure out what he's going to be, decides he's going to be the greatest thief in the empire.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
And he
he's
does
not
pretty
lacking
good.
in ambition.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, and he's good at it. Yeah.
Yeah, but Hope is coming from an entirely different place because her parents were horribly killed by one of the really interesting things you have in the book, which are the biomancers. Could you tell us a little bit about the biomancers?
So the biomancers they're a semi-religious order that serves the empire, well, specifically serves the emperor. And they have dedicated themselves to the safety of the emperor and the empire. And they believe that a threat is imminent and have been spending years kind of building up a number of ways to combat this threat. What they can do is they can change living things. They can make animals bigger or smaller. They can kind of combine them together, and people as well. They can. And as long as it's a living thing, they can pretty much do whatever they want with it by touch. If they touch it, they can kind of command it to do whatever they like. And what they're often doing is developing these, in a sense, biological weapons and they'll use actual people to experiment on, which is what happens to Hope. Not just her family, but her entire village is massacred brutally because they're in an outlying rural village that nobody really cares about. So this biomancer comes in, he's got this great new idea for these giant parasitic wasps that one could, kind of plant onto an enemy camp. And if you're familiar with parasitic wasps, what they do is they lay their eggs inside of living hosts, and then the larvae hatch inside the host, eat the non-essential bits inside the host, and then emerge and burst through the host's skin. This is like real life. This is really what paradise. So
these are bigger and do it in
but
people.
They're bird-sized, roughly bird-sized, and they do it in people. And she's the only survivor. She just happened to be out of the village, hanging out by the shore, looking for sea glass when it all happens. And Hope comes from a very specific thing. I was looking through a book of photography, and there was it was a series of homeless people, and there was this one little girl who was maybe 5. A little blonde girl with like curly hair, and there was this kind of dead, empty look in her eyes that just struck me immediately. And I thought, what would you have to have gone through to become that, to look like that at that age, you know? And so that's kind of what I imagined for Hope was her kind of thing. And Hope isn't even really her name. She's forgotten it over the tragedy, and so she's adopted by this this monk. They name her after the village, which was called Bleak Hope, and so that becomes her name, Bleak Hope.
Yeah. Oh, the dead eyes. I mean, that's in there at the when you first meet her, and it's really chilling when you see what she's been through and then what her affect is with everybody. And yeah, the monk. It's a particular set of monks.
They're warrior monks.
They're warrior monks, of course. But women are not allowed to be part of it, and she's a servant. But the old monk trains her. Yeah. So she becomes
secretly trains her.
Yes, which costs him, his life.
Yeah.
And she escapes, and she gets back into Paradise Circle after pirating and things. And Hope and Red meet up
They do.
and
They do.
team
About
up,
halfway through the book.
and they're both about vengeance. Well, her particular.
Oh, she's very much
She
about
wants to
vengeance.
destroy
She's
the
very
biomancers.
driven. Yeah, the biomancer in particular who
Yes.
slaughtered her village.
Yes.
Understandably.
Yeah, yeah. But there's a third character in the book that's not in the title.
No.
So when you meet this character as a point of view character, it's surprising.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing character. At first, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be the big villain. This is going to be
You know, that's
the
wonderful
big bad
because I
guy.
wanted you to wonder if
Because he's a
if-
biomancer
Right.
and he's gone off to
Yeah.
find the secret
could
thing.
be the
and
ultimate adversary.
Yeah, and instead, it turns in a direction you do not expect.
Absolutely. Hopefully.
Because he finds the secret chapter in the book, but it's biomancy that can only be done by a woman.
Yeah.
So he changes into a woman.
Seems obvious to him.
Yeah.
He doesn't even hesitate. It doesn't even come up in
No.
his mind. And he's like, yeah, well, it was perfectly reasonable to him, you know.
In like minutes, everything changes.
Yeah, there's a whole
And he
scene.
realizes he's always been that way.
Yeah.
It's like magical, a magical transsexual.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. She's transgender, and you know, I actually talked to some transgender folks because I really wanted to make sure I got that one right because it could be done terribly wrong, and you know, one of the most interesting things I like to play with Briga Lynn is that she even though she's a woman and fully owns her femininity, she has the entitlement of a man.
Yes.
And so, and particularly in a patriarchal society like the Empire of Storms, everyone is very much taken aback by it, and she never seems to, you know, she's aware of it, but not interested in changing, you know what I mean, and conforming to anything really, which is, she's a delight to write because she's just such a dynamic and exciting character to me.
Yeah, and there's things, I'm curious about the research for the book because there's a lot of sailing in it.
There is. There's even more in book 2.
Ah,
Naval battles.
all right. So did you research sail or have you?
Enormously. I already know how to sail. I grew up sailing. So sailing has always been a passion for me. I don't do it much anymore, sadly, because there's not much sailing to be done in Greenbelt, Maryland. But, you know, but yeah, but in addition to that, though, I did have to do an enormous amount of research because all I've been on is like modern day, you know, like stuff, and not just the actual mechanics of sailing these massive 3-masted, square-rigged frigates and brigs, but also the culture that goes along with it, like naval culture and pirate culture. I read an enormous amount on all those things, not just pirate culture, but pirate tactics as well, because, you know, they often were smaller ships going after much bigger ships, and well, how did they accomplish that? You know, how did they actually make that work? And I was lucky to find some really great resources on all of that stuff. So,
And the sword work that comes into play with Hope.
yeah, she has a
and others.
particularly special sword
Yeah.
called the Song of Sorrows, which, so the story goes, I like to mess around with how much is true and not true. There's all these folk tales and ideas that you're never quite sure, is it real or is it just something that people have been saying long enough? But the Song of Sorrows has a peculiar humming sound, an unnerving humming sound as it moves through the air. And so the story goes, it was created by a biomancer and a Vincian, which is the warrior monks, together. And it has been imbued with a consciousness of sorts, supposedly, and that it is aware and grieves every single death that it takes. And the hum you hear is the sound of its grief
Yeah.
as it's about to take another life.
Yeah. So they all get together, they fight the power. They fight, what's interesting is they're not just fighting the Empire and,
Right.
and the imps. There's part of it where they end up fighting the kind of the structure that's in the neighborhood, in Paradise Circle, the kind of guy that's the head of the gangs.
Yeah, the gang lord.
Who is basically sending people to the biomancers.
Right, to use as experiments.
Yeah, to
Fodder
be
for the
experimented
experiment,
on
yeah.
so that they leave him alone and they go to other neighborhoods and fight. But what I'm curious about is where's this going? What's happening in the second book?
Well, so the second book is called Bane and Shadow, and it will be out in February, so not that long.
Yeah.
And it's hard to talk about too much without spoiling the end of Hope and Red, but what we will see throughout the first three books, is a gradual expansion of the world. There's a lot, in the second book, I had a lot of fun at the palace in Stone Peak with all the nobility, and there's a lot of comedy of manners sort of stuff going on there as Red kind of immerses himself in political intrigue and finds himself pretty good at it, actually. Whereas Hope kind of expands more upon the pirate thing, and what ultimately she begins to question is not just the individuals who have done wrong to her, but the system as a whole. Is the system wrong? Is the empire wrong? Should it even exist? You know, and so as the story goes, she begins to see the bigger picture and tries to decide, well, what can I do about it? So, you know, ultimately, the first three books will have its own full circle arc.
That's great.
All the way through. Yeah.
That's great, and that's coming out in February 2017.
The second one's Bane and Shadow will be out in February, with the third sometime roughly 9 or 10 months after that, I think, is the
Great.
goal.
Well, I look forward to it. We are out of time.
All right, all right.
I look forward to reading more.
Cool.
And thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And this for Mike Zipser and all of us here at Fast Forward and Capclave, this is Mike Zipser saying take care.